I am presented with a dilemma. Let's call it a two-sided coin. If the coin falls one way, I sacrifice myself and thus restore the pillars. But as the last surviving vampire in Nosgoth, this would mean the annihilation of our species. Mobius made sure of that. If the coin lands on the reverse, I refuse the sacrifice and thus doom the pillars to an eternity of collapse. Either way, the game is rigged.
We agree, then, that the pillars are crucial and must be restored.
Yes, Raziel. And that's why we've come full circle to this place.
So after all this, you make my case for me. To end this stalemate, you must die so that new guardians can be born.
The pillars don't belong to them, Raziel. They belong to us.
Your arrogance is boundless, Kane.
There's a third option. A monumental secret, hidden in your very presence here. But it's a secret you have to discover for yourself. Unearth your destiny, Raziel. It's all laid out for you here.
You said it yourself, Kane. There are only two sides to your coin.
Apparently so. But suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day it lands on its edge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of The Save Point. I am your host, Shepherd, and this is my co-host.
Your co-host, Joker, and it is great to be back doing this once again, my friend. How have you been?
I've been very well, sir. How are you?
Sure, if it was any better, it wouldn't do, as they say.
Yeah.
So we have an interesting and very, in some ways, historic franchise that we're kind of going to be touching upon today. It's quite a long franchise, and I believe it is something that deserves a lot of attention, just in terms of the writing and what it brought to the table back in the day of first-generation consoles, especially the PlayStation 1. So, Shepard, what are we going to be discussing today?
Today, Joker, we will be discussing the historic, as you said, Legacy of Kain franchise. There's 5 main installments in that series. There's Blood Omen, Soul Reaver 2, Blood Omen 2, and Legacy of Kain Defiance. We will touch on briefly the spin-off title Nosgoth at the end of this video as well. But we will be primarily focusing on the main series, and particularly the games that we have played and the ones that meant the most to us. Mm-hmm. It's a huge franchise. There's so much to dig into, and it'll be a roller coaster.
That's very true, and it's one of those games where I think, well, not even one of those games, one of those franchises where time is literally convoluted.
Yeah.
It really is heavily based around the convulsions of time, and how the franchise and the series, and even some of the sequels and indeed some of the prequels, don't actually lead on from one another. Originally, I got into this whole franchise by playing the Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, which was the action-adventure video game developed by Crystal Dynamics and further published by Eidos Interactive. Originally, that came out in 1999, and then for the Dreamcast in 2000. But I believe before this game, lore-wise, there was another title before that, and it's one that I haven't played myself. I have touched upon it in just doing some research on the lore and background theories about it. But where does it start?
Well, the franchise starts with the Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen, which focuses on the character of Kane, who the franchise is named after. He's a central character in every mainline entry. So the first game starts, Kane, main character, and he gets killed. That's the opening of the game. He's a nobleman, walks into a bar, start of a bad joke. So yeah, he is nobleman. He goes to a bar. He's a bit of a dick to the barman, and when he walks outside, a bunch of assassins kill him. And this is actually in gameplay, which I thought was quite interesting.
Okay.
You as Kane, this is your tutorial essentially. You're fighting off some warriors from this kind of top-down perspective, and You're fighting them off and, killing a few, but they eventually overwhelm you, and Kane dies. Following that, he is resurrected as a vampire, which kickstarts the events of the entire franchise. It's amazingly well thought out, I believe, to an extent which we'll get into later. So he's revived by Mortanius the Necromancer, and Mortanius clearly has an agenda. He's like, hey, go kill those dudes that killed you, and then kill these guys. They're called the Circle, the Guardians of of Nosgoth. I was like, whoa, what are we getting onto here? So essentially, there are 9 pillars of balance in Nosgoth, or 9 pillars that balance the world. Essentially, they represent different aspects like time,
earth, water, fire, that kind of thing.
Similar in concept, but more kind of concepts than elements.
Yeah. Isn't the pillars are actually a central point throughout the entire franchise?
Yes. I think every game. Yeah, every single game in the franchise, at some point or another, you wind up at the pillars.
Yeah.
So the first game is directly tied to the fact that the pillars have gone to shit, the land is corrupt, and Mortanius is essentially telling you, oh, you can save the world if you kill the corrupted guardians of the pillars, and it'll cure your vampirism. So, as a character, your motivation is set, you set off on your quest. So he starts killing people. Kane, he kills a couple of guardians. He's like, oh, man, this humanity shtick, why did I like it in the first place? These people are terrible.
He's more happy as a vampire.
Essentially, yes. But it's still in his head that the end of his mission will result in his being cured of vampirism. So his motivation is still, I want to be human, but man, the humans are a bit crap. Eventually he gains the Soul Reaver in his travels. The Soul Reaver absorbs souls. That's what it does. It eats souls.
Isn't it a very interesting kind of design that the Soul Reaver actually is? Because like the Pillars of Nosgoth, like this is the one, not only is the franchise really focused around this weapon, the design itself it almost looks like a serpent's tongue.
Yeah.
The blade is quite curved, and it's almost like it kind of goes back to that biblical kind of thing, like the serpent's kind of temptation, the serpent's curse, where it lures the wielder in.
Yes.
Give them this unlimited power. And that's a Palpatine reference, obviously. But but it lures the wielder in with this great power that only they can wield. But in the end, it actually, to my knowledge, it actually starts decaying them a little bit on the inside. It starts taking over their humanism in some aspects.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And the interesting thing is, obviously, as you said, the pillars are kind of a staple of the entire franchise. So is the Soul Reaver, literally 2 games named after it. And we will get more into its significance later on, especially when we get to Legacy of Kain Defiance, where everything about the sword comes out. When you get it in Blood Omen, it's just a cool sword that eats souls. Obviously in Soul Reaver it holds more significance as it's Raziel's blade, but in this game it's just the best weapon. It's the ultimate weapon. It's significant, but it's not what it later means, I suppose.
I get you.
So Kane gets the Soul Reaver and discovers a time machine, because time travel. And he travels to a point in the past to stop a tyrant king known as the Nemesis from coming to power. And he's like, great, I've stopped that guy. That's the reason I was killed or something. So why don't I just go back to my original timeline? And when he does that, he realizes, oh no.
Time paradox.
Yeah, he screwed the timeline. And essentially resulted in vampires' extinction. He shows up in the modern day, modern for Kane. And witnesses the death of the final vampire, Vorador, who is his counsel up until this point. And Vorador as well is a staple through the franchise, mostly to Raziel and Kane in Soul Reavers 2 and Blood Omen 2. He's a big player in those games especially. But yeah, so in the modern day, Kane is like, man, I was duped by Mobius, the time streamer. He's also the Time Guardian. So that pillar, Time. And this is actually, I found this out in my research that Mobius dies in every single game.
Oh, oh.
Kane or Raziel at some point or another kill him in each game.
It's like the penny of the Legacy of Kain.
Yeah, you kill Mobius, you bastard. But the interesting thing about that is you don't care because Mobius is a weasel and you hate him. He's slime. He's manipulative. Throughout the whole game, he's essentially a figurehead. Not a figurehead, but he's behind a lot of the events of the series. Not directly, but he's involved in some way, shape, or form.
Kind of manipulating things.
Essentially. And he's often misleading, especially Raziel, in the Soul Reaver games. But yeah, so after Kane has killed all of the Guardians, he meets Ariel, the final Guardian. She's a spirit at the pillars. He had met her previously. And actually, the first Guardian Kane killed was her former lover, Nupraptor, which Nupraptor killed Ariel, which is what caused the pillar corruption in the first place. So the circle went insane, and that's why Kane had to wipe them all out and reset the balance, essentially.
Yeah.
So he meets Ariel, and Ariel's all, oh yeah, so there's actually still one Guardian left. And he's like, what? I killed them all. And she's like, yeah, it's you. And he's like, yeah. So he finds out that he is the final Guardian, the balanced Guardian. And the player is actually presented with a choice, something that they don't do again in the franchise, as far as I'm aware. And it's very on the nose, the choice. Ariel just has these two floating window things, and she's like, pick that one, and the world will be healed. However, you will die because you have to kill the final Guardian, which will mean the end of the vampire race.
Right.
Or pick the other one and ruin the world, but you'll live.
So Kane goes with the latter then, I imagine.
Canonically, yes. Obviously, the player has a choice, so there are two different endings, one of which the Nosgoth returns to normal, and that's the thing as well. The game is time travel. You could argue different timelines. So there's arguably both endings are canon. It's just the one where Kane was a douche and doomed the world so that he could rule it is what was visited in the franchise. So, Kane, that brings us to Soul Reaver 1, the game you're familiar with, and you know as well the iconic opening cutscene of that game. Kane with his Soul Reaver in hand, sitting on his throne of the pillars.
Oh my god, that opening! And you know what? The first thing you hear is just that iconic Michael Bell voice. You know, and this guy's American, and I was actually watching an interview with him a couple of days back where he was given the call about doing this audition to voice Raziel, and the writers had said, you know, we don't want your voice. We need you to go lower, and we need you to do like a British or an English accent. And I think it was his first time doing something as serious as that, because he was mostly known for doing stuff in the Smurfs and the Smurgs and things like that. But as you said, Shepard, we open up with this incredibly cinematic shot of Kane is sitting in this throne, kneeling back with the Soul Reaver just balanced, like the hilt is balanced on his hand, and Raziel walks through. And
the throne is the corrupted pillars, which I love.
Right.
It's essentially, it's a visual metaphor for the world is doomed, but you know, he's got to sit in it, he's got to live in it. And it's this great, like, I ruined the world, still my world. And it's just that's Kane in a nutshell, which we'll explore even further when we go into Raziel's backstory. And as you said, he walks in, and if you'd like to continue.
Yeah, so Raziel was part of this, I believe they're called the Seraphim, which were vampire hunters, but over time they became more divine in Raziel's world, Raziel's words. So he comes into the middle of this stone platform, and surrounded by him are he calls them his brothers, but they're essentially his brethren. They could be seen as they're not blood brothers, but they're like brothers in arms kind of thing.
Yes.
You have Malchiah, Zephon, Rahab, and Duma. And all of these at some point go down their own route. And become more twisted in their own vampiric natures. They become mini bosses essentially, but you are subsequently going after each of these. They're kind of like mini bosses before you get to the end result. He did have a fifth brother called Tyrell, but he was omitted due to time constraints on development, so I don't believe he was ever touched upon again. But due to time constraints, he didn't make it to this game.
Yes, he does actually appear in Legacy of Kain Defiance. I suppose they wanted to tie up that loose thread in the franchise.
Yeah, I believe I think he was mentioned somewhat by the Elder God, but we'll get to the Elder God in a moment.
Yeah.
So Raziel was seen as Kane's prodigal son, and this is where the shift in balance kind of comes into fruition, I feel. So Raziel stands before his master and sprouts these wings. They're like gargoyle wings, and Kane doesn't have those. So he looks at this being in front of him, and you can almost see it in his eyes. And this is done all with CGI. And another game that really went for that cinematic route at the time was Metal Gear Solid 1 for the PlayStation 1. That and this game, Soul Reaver, they're so cinematic. The score, the writing, the voice acting it's just second to none. Kane stands up to examine his prodigal son, Raziel, and runs his hands along Raziel's wings. And in response to Raziel's loyalty, Kane breaks his wings and takes him to this bigger platform overlooking the Lake of the Dead, which is a swirling vortex of souls. And Raziel turns to the rest of the brothers and says, "Cast him in." So Raziel is thrown in for what appears to be a millennia. His bones are stripped clean of flesh. He's burning in agony in this visceral, ethereal water of dead beings and souls and essence, and he finally sinks to the bottom of this place. He lies dead for who knows how long, and the cape that he was wearing over his shoulder, which shows off his captain's banner, falls gracefully onto Raziel's back. He's laying on his stomach, but in that moment he looks up and his eyes are glowing. He's been brought back to life by this spectral being simply known as the Elder God. So when Raziel wakes up from his long slumber after who knows how many years of absolute torment, the first thing that he says is, "What madness is this?" And it's really, Raziel is just as he's what is going on here. And it's as he gets out of this this plane, it introduces the player to these two stages, I'm going to say, of existence. One of them is this, I'm going to call it the Netherworld, where Raziel wakes up after being cast into the Lake of the Dead. And the other world is, like you mentioned, present-day Nosgoth. But it's not really present-day Nosgoth as Raziel had once believed it was. It is now in further decay and further ruin. It's just everything down to the architecture, everything down to the enemies that you encounter. It's an awful lot more of a very, very dangerous environment. And Raziel really has to quickly adapt to what's going on here. Not only did somebody who brought him up in this Sarafan Brotherhood turn on him, he's basically a wraith. And now it's up to him to try and get his humanity back. So, as I mentioned before, his brothers or his brethren have all transmorphed into these horrific beings of vampiric essence. They're no longer their former selves. They've been given their own little plots of, as far as I can remember, they've been given their own little zones in Nosgoth to kind of look after, manage, and make sure that nobody comes in or out and nobody leaves, just to upstand Kane's territorial rule over a land that he has really destroyed in the first place. If we're going on this canonical kind of story,
he'd rather rule in decay than die and let the world heal. Essentially, it's pure vanity.
I think that's exactly what it is, and it comes to the fact that the two things that Raziel and Kane share. The first is that Raziel can wield what's called a Wraith Blade, and Kane can wield this Soul Reaver. Now it does come into light that Raziel can also get his hands on Soul Reaver, and no matter how many times he tries to put it down or put it aside, it latches itself back onto him. I think that's mentioned in one of the later editions. But the other thing that they do have in common is the duality of both of them. They didn't ask for this at all. It wasn't a path that was given to them, and that kind of comes into where you were talking about the first Blood Omen was. It kind of seems that during this whole franchise, there's always something going on in the background that you're not really aware of, but motions start coming into place that, you know, they were probably predetermined, and we're only finding out along with Kane and Raziel, and they are subjects of their scenarios, really. Neither of them wanted this to happen, but Kane would rather rule a land of decay than rule a land destroyed by something else.
Yes.
You know, that's just what I take. So coming on from when Raziel is brought back to life from this slumber by this elder god, would you like to explain then how the original Soul Reaver goes ahead in its story pacing?
Yeah. So as you were saying, Raziel wakes up in front of the elder god, this Lovecraftian monstrosity, and that's something as well. The franchise is often referred to as gothic horror, and I feel like the elder god is the perfect personification of that. He's voiced by Tony J, who many people may remember as
Count Frollo.
Yeah, Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame. You just want him to start singing Hellfire.
What a voice! What a voice!
He's horny for Raziel. So essentially he's like, hey, Raziel, so you've been dead for like 500 plus years, like dead again after your initial death before you became a vampire, and now you're a different kind of vampire. You're a soul vampire, a soul reaver. And of course that's metaphorical and literal. So as the game progresses, Raziel is learning more and more about the current state of Nosgoth, how much it's gone into decline. He meets his brothers that you've mentioned as well, whose names escape me, except for Terrell at this point in time. And each of them...
Uma, Malchiah, Rahab, and Zephon.
Yes, exactly. So those four he meets throughout the events of the first game, and systematically he kills them and absorbs their abilities. But every time he meets one, they're in this mutated, grotesque state. They're essentially just beasts now. They're not even vampires anymore. They're something far worse. Eventually, the last brother he kills is essentially like a giant insect that can't even leave its lair because its body has morphed into the wall itself. It's the graphical fidelity for a PlayStation 1 game was stunning to look at. It was like, how did they manage this stuff? Like,
it was the atmosphere, I think, that really sticks out, you know. And it's going back to what you said about that they've molded into something that is more than just a monster. They've actually become part of their surroundings in some aspect. And even though each of these brothers are brothers in arms have fallen to what can be seen as Kane's own negligence or greed, when Raziel goes to meet him, it's just, you brought a point there about one of the brothers. He's kind of like this spider creature. That would be Malchiah.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Malchiah is vomiting his responses to, he's regurgitating on this poison that's taken over his body. And even when Raziel is greeting his brothers, he talks to them as if he's looking into their soul. Like when he meets Malchiah, for example, he can't believe it. He actually says Malchiah.
Yeah.
You know, but even though Raziel is trying to bring his clan back, they're so far gone now at this stage that they probably don't even remember who they were as a Seraphim, let alone as a human.
Yes. That's actually a huge key plot point in later games, is the Raziel's ties to the Seraphim and the vampire hunters and everything like that. They do explore that in the sequels. But I suppose one of the biggest plot points of the first Soul Reaver is in the name itself. Then early on, Kane and Raziel come to blows, and Kane tries to strike Raziel down with the titular blade, the physical manifestation of the Soul Reaver, and it breaks. And I was like, "Whoa, what? The Soul Reaver broke? That's supposed to be like the blade? Yeah, it's meant to be like the world-ending blade." And it breaks on Raziel, which is in itself some sort of paradox. You find this out in Soul Reaver 2, which I'll get into shortly, that there was far more to that encounter than you realized. And as a result of the blade breaking, that's when Raziel gets his spectral version of the Soul Reaver. It latches onto him, as you said, as a wraith blade. And that becomes his de facto weapon for the remainder of the franchise. So following all of this, he has the spirit blade. He has killed and absorbed the abilities of his brethren, and he reaches the finale of the game where Kane is in a time streaming device. And Kane is like, "Yeah, man, you don't even know what's going on. This is so much more than you thought was possible. So much more than you realize is happening right now." So Kane steps into the time streaming device, and Raziel pursues him, and that's the end of the first game. You're like, that's a huge cliffhanger. Like, what?
So Raziel essentially is chasing after Kane, and it cuts to black to be continued. Essentially,
yeah. It's a huge cliffhanger.
The question I want to ask you, Shepard, is: do you think, because Kane obviously has so much knowledge about the infinite amount of timelines that can occur in Nosgoth and anywhere else, do you think that all that knowledge kind of drove him a little bit up the wall or a little bit insane?
I think, firstly, Kane has been around for hundreds of years, if not well over 1,000 years at this point in the timeline. So you could argue, yes, knowledge is probably crippling to him at this stage, especially because Kane is a firm believer in the Wheel of Fate, which is what the Elder God preaches to Raziel. He says the Wheel of Fate is absolute. All creatures are a part of it, except, as we will learn later in the franchise, vampires. The interesting thing being that the Wheel of Fate, as it were, is the Elder God's food source. It's life, death, and rebirth are the three stages of the Wheel of Fate. So people are born, they live their lives, they die, their soul goes through this Wheel of Fate, or in this case, the Elder God, and they are reborn as a new person or creature, being, whatever. But vampires are separated from the Wheel of Fate because of their undeadness, as it were, their immortality. So the Elder God hates them. So
them as kind of cannon fodder in a way.
Almost the opposite. He sees them as a blight on his life. He sees them as something that needs to be wiped out, which is, now this is the interesting kind of, again, another link between Kane and Raziel. Raziel used to be a Sarafan warrior and hunted vampires. Kane turned him into a vampire. Raziel, further down the timeline, became a vampire killer again.
Okay.
So it always revolves around Kane. Kane turned a vampire killer into a vampire, then killed that vampire, and turned him into another vampire killer.
Is this going to be on the test next week?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Just ask Morgana under your desk. Persona 5 reference. Yeah, so it's interesting that Kane corrupted Raziel's corpse in a sick sense of irony. It's like, screw the vampire killers, I turned them into vampires. But then he made his own worst enemy.
Yeah.
Kills his right-hand man for daring to surpass him.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, Raziel became the Soul Reaver incarnate, essentially. Now, there's so much more wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff later on in the franchise. So if you're happy to move on to Soul Reaver 2.
Absolutely. So the last we heard was that Raziel was bolting after Kane in the time stream. Yeah. So where does that lead us into the story now?
So that brings us to Mobius is on the other end of that time streaming device. And Raziel catches up to him and he's like, "Hey, you must be Mobius, the time streamer. I'm pretty sure the first Soul Reaver and Blood Omen 2, they're the two games Mobius isn't in, and so he doesn't die in them, but he dies in every game he's in." To reference my previous point. So Raziel learns that Mobius serves the Elder God as well, and is like, "Oh, fine. I guess I better work with this dick." But Mobius is adamant to lead Raziel down a certain path, and he won't accept anything else. He's like, "No, man, you got to do what the Elder God says. The Elder God knows his stuff."
So he's leading Raziel down a pathway that he, in some ways, it comes across as we were talking about this earlier, that he seems to be like the Grima Wormtongue of.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like that that slithery little prick in the background who's kind
he's the devil on Raziel's shoulder. He's the one. He whispers the orders of the Elder God, and he never questions the Elder God's machinations. But Raziel,
so Mobius is a servant of this Elder God, then.
Sorry. Yes.
Mobius is a servant of this Elder God.
Yes, okay. And he assumes Raziel is as well, but Raziel, as this game goes on, begins to realize the Elder God is not what it says it is.
And this is the same Elder God that revived Raziel in the
first place. Yeah, it's central to the Soul Reaver plot and the plot of Defiance. So Raziel meets Vorador in this game. Vorador is alive again because time travel, so they went back in time.
This is Vorador from Blood Omen 1.
Yes. So essentially, at this point in time, Raziel is actually around the point when Kane corrupted the Pillars.
Okay.
From Blood Omen 1. So he's actually in the timeline of Blood Omen 1 now.
I get you.
Sorry, Kane didn't corrupt the Pillars. He nearly did. He will later, but not yet. Time travel. So Vorador is all, yo, you need to seek out the original vampire, Janos Audrin. He's the guy. He can create more vampires. But he's dead. It's like, that's great. It's so helpful. Thank you. So Raziel finds out following this that essentially, as you said before, like destiny, fate, these are hard facts. Kane is part of destiny. Mobius is part of destiny. Vorador, Janos Audrin, the Sarafan, all of them, they're a part of destiny. And Raziel is the only one with free will. Which is an interesting twist. It's like, how does that work? Because he's been broken out of the Wheel of Fate, as it were, by the Wheel of Fate itself, by the Elder God. So Raziel is a free agent to do what he wishes. It's a line in this game as well. It's this masterful cutscene where Raziel meets Kane at the Pillars of Nosgoth. And they're talking, and Kane refers to them as two sides of the same coin. That old cliche, but he does a great little twist on it. It was like Raziel keeps referring to the coins. You're the one who keeps saying we're two sides of the same coin. How can I have free will and you don't? And if I have free will, why do I keep doing what you and Mobius are telling me to do? And Kane is like, well, that's the thing. We're telling you what to do, but you're the one who chooses to do them.
Yeah,
you don't have to follow our guidance. And he and I are enemies. Like Kane, Mobius, they don't get along. So, Kane will say, don't listen to Mobius. Mobius will say, don't listen to Kane. And Raziel
like,
kind of...
Kingseeker, Frampt, and Koth, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, kill the gods because they're dicks. Hey, kill the gods because they're not dicks.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Raziel is like, but like, I'm still doing what everyone's telling me to do. I do what the Elder God tells me. I do what Kane tells me. I do what Mobius tells me. How is that free will?
Yeah.
And Kane is like, because you're the one who can make the choices around these guidances or whatever. So again, in this conversation at the Pillars, Raziel brings up the coin. Oh, we're two sides of the same coin. How does that work? And Kane masterfully does his line of, suppose you flip a coin so many times. Suppose one time it lands on its edge. And then he disappears. And it's like, oh, that's what Raziel is. He's the one flip that lands, the coin lands on its edge, and he's the one in a million outcome.
Yeah.
That nobody else can replicate. Nobody can. Yeah, exactly. So, eventually, he triggers the time paradox because, of course,
why not?
And he has to travel back in time again, or travel forward in time and travel back in time. And eventually he finds the body of Janos Audrin. He meets Janos Audrin in his stronghold. So, Janos has this massive structure built in the side of these mountains that the Sarafan can't reach. But the Sarafan, being the absolute swine they are killing vampires left, right, and center and leaving their corpses outside his front door as a warning. It's like, we're coming for you. It's only a matter of time. It's twisted.
Dark.
Yeah. But like, so, you know, his balcony, I suppose, overlooks this glacial wasteland with hundreds of bodies of his own brethren. And it's terrible. It's like they can't get to him physically, but they can get to him mentally.
Oh my God, that's
yeah. But Raziel is able to find a way into Janos's headquarters, and he meets him, and he's like, "Yo, I'm here. I need help." They discuss what to do, but then the Sarafan followed Raziel into the stronghold. And
because of course they did.
yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, dumb video game protagonist cliche. Damn it.
Yeah.
So Janos teleports Raziel somewhere else into the building, and Raziel, you know, for video game reasons, has to upgrade his Wraith Blade to get back into the room. Eventually he does, and when he does, he walks in to see Janos Audrin getting whacked around. He's lying on a table, and the Sarafan are holding him down. And this one with a blade on his arm looks up, and it's a human Raziel.
Oh.
Yeah. So Raziel, human version, slices open Janos Audrin's chest and rips out his heart. And Raziel, spectral version, is like, what? I did that? Shit. So the Sarafan leave, and Raziel goes to the dying body of Janos.
Can I cut across?
Yeah.
Just 1 second, okay? So this game was released, what, maybe a year and a half afterwards, maybe 2, maybe 3 years after.
I think it was a 2001 title, maybe.
Right. What other game could do that? You know, like what other narrative could actually drop you in the middle of this and go, behold.
Yes.
You know, that's
the thing. Other games, even around then, had, you know, experimented with concepts of time travel and being in a place and realizing, oh, I was there all along. But it's the way the story is paced and delivered and written and acted, and it's literally like, oh, like, you know, he's a Sarafan before this. Raziel knows his history, but you never once think he'd be the one
face to face coming to terms with this.
Add to the fact that, you know, human Raziel had a blade on his arm, like a.
Yeah, that's confusing. So isn't it that so the only time you see when Raziel gets the Wraith Blade is when obviously he's a Wraith, but when in the brief opening cutscene that we saw, like, he had no weapons on him whatsoever.
Yes, well, see, this was
a paradox thing, or
well, at the beginning of the game in the CGI cutscene, it's Vampire Raziel, and with his wings and all that stuff. The Sarafan version, it's equipment that he has, like a glove with a blade down that way.
Yeah.
So that's what he uses. So it's just equipment that he wouldn't have had probably when he was a vampire, and he would, you know, he died since then. Yeah. So that shit happens, and eventually, so then it gets more mental. So Raziel eventually goes back.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah. But wait, hold my beer. That's like the rest of the game to what came before. Hold my beer. I've got more for you. So the rest of the game continues. Raziel goes back to the Sarafan stronghold. Mobius is there. There's the whole thing. I think at this point Kane kills Mobius, and then Kane essentially what happens is, sorry, Kane isn't there. Raziel discovers the Soul Reaver, and he takes it up in his hand, and as you said, it kind of clings to him.
Yeah.
And he impales himself against his will and starts to get absorbed into the blade. Kane shows up. He's like, no, grabs the Soul Reaver, pulls it out of his chest, but then the world around them starts to break and shift because they caused a time paradox. Raziel at that point in time was supposed to die and get sucked into the blade and become the spirit of the Soul Reaver, which is why when Kane struck him with the blade in the first game, it broke, because the Soul Reaver can't break the Soul Reaver.
That makes that. I know to the person listening to this right now, it probably sounds like what the fuck, but that actually game story wise makes so much sense.
Yeah. So that's the ending.
In this timeline, Raziel is supposed to impale himself, he's supposed to die. His essence gets put into the Soul Reaver. He becomes the soul of the Soul Reaver.
Yeah.
Which is why when Kane went to hit him the first time with the Soul Reaver, it shattered because his soul essence was already in there.
Yeah, you can't break a sword with itself.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's the end.
That's it?
That's the ending of the Soul Reaver 2. The game ends there, and it's like...
These guys.
Yeah, they love it. Well, what happens is Kane is like, no, Raziel, we got to meet up again and fix all this shit. And Raziel is like, well, I'm dead. And then winds up back in the spectral realm with the Elder God.
Yeah.
And that's the end. That's the end of Soul Reaver 2. It's like, God damn. And this is where I'm going to take a short break from the main franchise and explore a little bit of the history of Nosgoth.
Cool.
So we've mentioned the Sarafan.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out the Sarafan are actually governed by a race of... So there's humans, vampires, and there's a group called the Hilden. The Pillars of Nosgoth are actually used to keep the Hilden out of Nosgoth. There was a huge war thousands of years before our protagonists were born, where the Hilden fought the original vampires, which were angelic beings. And, so these vampires worshipped the Wheel of Fate, the Elder God, and they were like, it's all great. And the Hilden were like, nah, man, technology, fuck that Elder God shit. We don't believe in that. That's crap. So it caused a war.
So they relied on, the Hilden were these beings that had more high-powered weapons and such.
Essentially, it was almost a steampunk world for them, which is what you see a lot more of in Blood Omen 2. So the Hilden, they were technologically driven. They didn't believe in deities or gods or any of that kind of stuff. Whereas the vampires at the time, who were, as I said, angelic creatures, and the humans who served under both, they were all, oh man, but the Wheel of Fate, man, that's our belief. We got to respect our belief, and that's what caused a huge war between the two. Eventually, the vampires won this war and cast the Hilden out of our reality, or their reality, and that's then created the Pillars of Nosgoth as the barrier to shield them and keep them out, with the Soul Reaver being the key to that barrier. However, the Hilden, in one last act of defiance, cursed the vampires with a thirst for blood and immortality, severing them from the Wheel of Fate.
So, oh my god.
Yeah. So they became immortal. They needed to feed on others to survive, and they could no longer be a part of their own religion. Diabolical. Yeah, well, I mean...
I can kind of understand it was like, you're going to banish us away from all of this stuff, here's one last kind of nail in the coffin that we're going to give to your entire kind.
Yeah. It was a kick in the face.
Yeah, dark. Dark. So what happened to the Hilden? Like, where did they ever make... He said that they came back into Blood Omen, but was there a leader of the Hilden or anything like that?
So essentially, there was the Hilden Lord, who is the main antagonist of Blood Omen 2. But at the time, you don't know that he's the main antagonist. He's just the Sarafan Lord. So that was the idea, is that the Hilden were able to control people on Nosgoth's side, like mind control, and they created the Sarafan as vampire hunters from a different reality.
Good lord, man.
Yeah. So there's not just time travel, there's interdimensional travel.
Good God. I mean, so at the back of my mind when I'm listening to you explain this, and honest to God, like you're doing a fucking great job at explaining it. It's like at the center of all this, like who really is the person who kickstarted it all? Was it the Elder Gods? Was it Mobius? Was it Kane? Was it, because if Kane never walked into that pub and started a ruckus, like none of this shit would have happened.
Well, that's kind of a point as well. Is you could argue someone set all these events in motion because Mortanius, as an example, wanted the Guardians dead. Mortanius probably hired those assassins to kill Kane so that he could revive him as a vampire. And the thing as well is we're going to be looking back at how he became a vampire in Defiance. But first, let's move on to Blood Omen 2.
Okay. Where does Blood Omen 2 take place timeline?
Timeline-wise, this is actually a point of contention among fans because Soul Reaver 2 and Blood Omen 2 were developed alongside each other.
Okay.
Believe it or not, Soul Reaver 2 actually entered development after Blood Omen 2, but was released before it. And Blood Omen 2 came out and was worse to play and looked worse. So Blood Omen 2, it's set a couple of hundred years after Blood Omen 1, basically. So long before he recruited Raziel or any of that kind of stuff. So he essentially leads an army of vampires to fight the Sarafan Lord, and Sarafan Lord withstands an attack from the Soul Reaver and defeats Kane. Kane falls into a slumber for about 200 years and wakes up in a sort of Sarafan industrial revolution, which was orchestrated by the Hilden.
Yep.
So it's been said that this is now a result of the change in timeline from Kane pulling the sword out of Raziel's chest, that this created a new timeline where Kane lost the Soul Reaver for some time and all this stuff. So, yeah. So, Kane wakes up and is like, hey, what's going on? Where's all my kingdom and shit? And this last group of surviving vampires are like, hey, so we lost and the Sarafan ruled the world. Great. So it's up to Kane then to kill his own, kind of in a almost mirroring Soul Reaver 1. He has to kill his former vampire lieutenants.
Because they've become Sarafan, or
they've defected essentially over to the Sarafan, except for one of them he meets later on in the game, who is essentially, he was tortured and beaten for the 200 years that Kane was gone, and his mind was broken. So there's not much in the middle of the plot for Blood Omen 2. It's largely just Kane killing these vampires and learning bits and bobs about the Sarafan.
Mm-hmm.
He discovers from a Hilden prisoner that they have a weapon. Or he discovers about the weapon, but he learns more about it from this Hilden prisoner. The Sarafan have this weapon, which is actually a weapon of the Hilden, that can wipe out all vampires. So Kane is like, well, gotta destroy that. That sounds terrible. Gotta get rid of that.
That's my Sunday lunch,
Yeah, man. Didn't ruin my whole day. So he goes to the weapon, and the weapon is similarly to Raziel's brothers. It's this mutated creature, and it's like, kill me.
Can I just say,
yeah,
like the clone of Ripley, in
Alien, God,
which goes in, kill me. But is this so in this timeline of Blood Omen 2, the location, are we still in Nosgoth?
Yes, it largely takes place in the capital city of Nosgoth, which has not been referenced up to this point in the franchise, called Meridian.
Right. And that's like the Sarafan kind of industrial revolution.
Yes. It's this huge sprawling city, very steampunky in design. There's lots of pipes and steam and grunge, and like the previous games were all castles and gothic forests and yeah, exactly, like very medieval nearly. This game is a bit more industrial revolution.
Lots of smoke.
Yeah, exactly. But in a way to kind of fit the atmosphere, because a big part of the game was, as Kane, when you're playing it, you're trying to be stealthy. And you sneak up on people, you snap their necks, you drink their blood, that kind of stuff. So, and like Kane had these abilities like go invisible or jump long distances. So stealth was encouraged in a lot of parts of this game.
Because you were the last of your kind, basically, aren't you?
Yeah, so there was only a small sect of vampires remaining.
Yeah, so you're not going to go like swinging your blade around. You're going to be taking the high approach to stealth, the shadows,
Exactly.
necks and all that kind of thing. Unlike in, say, what I was used to in Soul Reaver 1, where if you saw a mob of enemies coming towards you, you ain't going to be thinking about stealth, son.
No,
You're going to
yeah.
go in there, you know, you're going to lob some head offs, you know what
Yeah,
I mean?
man. You got to throw them fools and impale them on shit.
Exactly. You got to impale them into candlestick holders at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. That's the dream.
So, in Blood
Um,
Omen 2, so Kane is basically fighting against this new reality that has been brought on. He's looking to find this hidden super weapon that can completely eradicate the last remaining part of his kind.
yeah.
So where do we go from here?
So essentially, he, as I said, he meets the weapon. The weapon is a living creature, and he's told by the weapon only the blood of my creator can kill me. It's like a fail-safe that was put into the weapon. So he goes and he gets the blood from a Hilton prisoner in some prison in Meridian, brings it back, and the creature is actually healed. And the creature turns out to be an alive Janos Audrin.
The Vampire Lord.
Yes, the first of the vampires, yeah.
First of the vampires, yeah.
And it's like, okay.
Hang on, so they have a vampire weapon, vampire overlord to wipe out the vampires. I heard you like vampires, son, so we put a vampire in a vampire game to wipe out all the vampires that you're trying to kill.
It's insane. So
son.
Yeah, so following this, Kane learns of the reason that the Seraphon Lord was able to resist the Soul Reaver is a weapon called the Nexus Stone. It's a bracelet, necklace thing that the Seraphon Lord wore when they fought, and Kane is like, I gotta get me that, because then I can take my Soul Reaver back. At this point, sorry, the Seraphon Lord has the Soul Reaver. So I was like, I gotta get the Nexus Stone, and then I can fight the Seraphon Lord and whatever. So you do that. There was this female vampire, Uma, who had been helping you throughout the game. And this is also another point of contention from a lot of fans, is that the characters were dressed much more sexually in this game. Like, sexuality hadn't really ever been considered in the franchise up to this point, but like Uma had,
She was kind of like a succubus.
Yes, essentially. But like a lot of female characters, or even Kane is topless for most of the game, and not like he was in the previous games. He actually has like a six-pack. Whereas in, like Soul Reaver, he has this yellowing skin, and it's, it was clearly they were like, let's go for that, the more seductive sexual vampire designs, which is, it's fine. It fit the style of the game they were going for, but it just didn't fit with the rest of the franchise.
I can kind of see where you're coming from with that, Shepard, because that kind of provocative imagery was really spearheaded with the likes of the Queen of the Damned.
Yeah.
So I think around that time of the vampire culture around the early 2000s, late 90s was very much, they were very seductive kind of nymphomaniacs in a way. But in saying that, though, underneath the actual appearances of these vampires and these creatures of the night, underneath their appearance, though, if you just take a step back and look at what they're trying to achieve and why they're doing this and what the whole story is based around, it goes beyond that image. It goes beyond that appearance. There is a deeper underlying story that is happening and unfolding.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it's a massive difference. Like, it looks like, again, if we're talking about the two sides of the same coin, you've got Blood Omen on this side and Soul Reaver on this side. The two different art styles, two different main characters, although they are, in some way, shape, or form, they are linked together.
Absolutely. And I personally, like, if that's what they want to do, if that's the story they want to tell, I respect that. And I personally, like, I played a lot of Blood Omen 2. I enjoyed that game. I know it's a point of contention among a lot of fans. And even I think among the two different dev teams, the developers of Soul Reaver, as I said, they were developed at the same time. Developers of Soul Reaver were like, we wanted to continue that almost Shakespearean, dialogue-heavy storytelling. Essentially. Whereas Blood Omen 2 wanted to focus more on the gore. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
sexualization of female characters, things like that.
And you could almost argue as well that was you could make the argument that this was a representation of Kane's mindset. He is a dominating character. He's he at all times has to be the most important person in the room. So that could like
That's actually such a good point. I'm sorry for cutting across it. That is such a good point. Like he has to be the most important person in the room, so much
yeah,
so that he actually, you know, broke the wings off of his prodigal son,
yeah,
his second in command, and threw him into a lake just for fear that he was going to be surpassed.
yeah. And even like throughout the Soul Reaver 1 and 2, you know, every time he meets Raziel, and Raziel is all like, hey, you tell me I have free will, but how? And Kane is all, well, yeah, you have free will, but I'm still more awesome, and like I rule the world and whatever, and I'm not going to die. Like throughout the games, Raziel is like, hey, aren't you supposed to be dead because that will fix the world? And Kane is like, yeah, but nah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is a big part of Blood Omen
Do
too.
you think that's because of just talking about Kane as a character? Do you think it's because of his nobility background that he was almost brought up to have this "I'm holier than thou" kind of
Yes.
attitude, or do you think it was he only kind of let it be amplified when he was turned from a human into a vampire? Do you think those primal instincts were amplified by his already nobility and his noble kind of background? What's your opinion on that?
I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying there. Like as you said, it starts off he's a nobleman. He comes from this pompous, rich background. Then he's given an opportunity at revenge, which empowers him further. And then even the finale of the first game is, hey, you literally hold the fate of the world in your hands. And Kane went with the option of self-service. You know,
Yeah.
he sacrificed nothing. And like I think every decision Kane makes furthers his ego
Mm.
and his desire to stay on top.
And yet,
Uh,
you know, the thing is about that, just that point that you made is even through all the decisions that he's made that has been of his benefit, somewhere deep in the back of my mind when I'm listening to you just expertly recite this and really dig deep into the lore about this, even in the back of my mind I'm thinking he can't be all that bad. Like he can't be. There's still some human left in him where he's fighting against his creators or something like that, you know.
well, that is actually explored a good bit in Defiance,
Okay.
which we'll get to shortly.
We'll get to
And yeah, trust me, there's a lot about Kane almost redeeming himself, in my opinion, in the finale of the series. And even, you know, he never lies or tricks anyone. He is, you know, with Kane, you get exactly what you see. He's like, I'm the boss, I'm the most important person, end of story. Um, so then the remaining elements of Blood Omen 2, he with Vorador, who is now alive in this timeline, instead of being killed because he changed time previously.
yeah.
Um, so himself, Vorador, Uma, and Janos Audrin plan an attack on the Sarafan stronghold. Uma betrays Kane, and Kane kills her. And even tell what I love about that is so so she steals the Nexus Stone essentially from Kane before
Is
they
that
go to
very
fight.
video gamey though, do you think?
At first, I thought it was because I thought, oh, maybe it'll just be this awkward conversation later on in the game, and he has to lie about it. But
Yeah.
what actually happens is he kills Uma after she takes the Nexus Stone, and then he goes to fight the Sarafan Lord with the Nexus Stone, and after that, he talks to Janos and Vorador, or maybe just before. Sorry, he talks to them, and they're like, "Yo, where's Uma?" And he's like, "Oh, I killed her. Why? She took the Nexus Stone. Don't piss me off." Like it's literally just him being like, "Yeah, I killed her. She betrayed me, and I killed her. Simple as." No,
No
like,
fucks given.
yeah, no fucks given, no bullshit, none of this. Oh, like she got in a scrape, and like, oh, I put her out of her misery. It's like, no, I killed her.
They beheaded her.
Yeah. So, and that's Kane in a nutshell. I think is that I do what I do for me, and I make people know that there's no trickery, no illusions, none of it. It's I am who I am, and I love that. And yeah, so following that, he fights the Sarafan Lord. Janos Audrin is there and falls into an abyss and winds up in the Hilden world.
Okay.
Time
That's the
travel.
world that, just again for our viewers watching,
Yeah.
that's the world that was subsequently cornered off with the
Yeah.
9 pillars of Nosgoth, and the key to opening up these pillars is the Soul Reaver.
Yeah.
Now, the question that I want to know, Shepard, is we've talked about what this weapon is and how it is the driving force for the pretty much the entire franchise, along with the duality of both Kane and Raziel, seen as like the duality of vampirism. We could go down that route and talk about that all day. But what I want to know is who actually crafted the Soul Reaver and what makes it so powerful? Is that ever discussed, or because originally what it came across to me is like you discussed in Blood Omen 1, it's just the weapon. It's like the ultimate celestial level 9,999. It's
ultimate
whatever.
weapon.
Exactly.
Yeah,
is there any part in the franchise that explains, or is it in Defiance that we're going to get to, or?
Well, actually, the Soul Reaver was crafted by Vorador.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly what point in the franchise it's mentioned. I'm certain it's quite early on. But the physical blade is crafted by Vorador because Janos was one of the people who was like, yeah, cast off the Hilden, lock them away, craft the blade as the kind of the binding point to keep them locked away. So Vorador, so that's another reason he's such a central character through the series. He's responsible for the blade itself. But that's large. I think that's his largest contribution, apart from occasional cryptic musings to Raziel in Soul Reaver 2. But yeah, so that's it. It's literally just Vorador crafted it because Janos wanted him to. But ironically, it's the act of Kane striking Raziel with the blade that gave it its real power.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Even though it broke it.
It's just like, that's so clever though, isn't it? Like
it gets more clever in Defiance. So just to wrap up Blood Omen 2, sorry. Janos fell into the Hilden world. Kane defeats the Sarafan Lord, and the Hilden are like, we will return! They totally sounded like that, by the way. Absolutely. I flawless impression. But then Kane is like, well, I guess I better go rule the world again.
Oh, I guess somebody must do it. It must be me.
And thankfully for the foreseeable future, anyway, Kane stops putting his dick in the timeline. So that leads us to Legacy of Kain Defiance. So as you remember, at the end of Soul Reaver 2, Raziel died died in the sense that he's back in the spectral realm after almost being absorbed into the blade, and Kane changed time. So now they're separated by a few hundred years, which is never actually explained as far as I'm aware. It's just suddenly Kane is in the future again, and Raziel is in the spectral plane being tormented by the other god.
I can kind of see that working though in some way, just because of the time schism.
Yeah, exactly. They recreate the thing of it is, you could argue the case that Kane changed time by pulling the blade out of Raziel's chest, and as a result, where he was likely got shifted, or when he was rather. So he's in a certain timeline, and he hunts down Mobius for information on where Raziel is, and Mobius is all like, "Oh, I think you mean when? Oh, time travel." And Raziel is back in the spectral realm being tormented by the Elder God. The Elder God's like, ha ha, you didn't kill Kane. And you're eventually, basically, his tauntings are all, you're going to be sucked into that blade. It's going to happen. End of story. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And Raziel's like, but I got free will. And that's kind of the main plot points for Defiance. So both Raziel and Kane learn more about the history of the war with the Hilden, as well as the fact that there are several murals they witness on their journeys through different timelines that show what looks to be a champion for the Hilden and a champion for the vampires.
Don't even say it. Don't even say it.
I mean,
is one going to be Raziel and the other's going to be Kane?
That's what they lead you to believe.
I knew it. Okay, continue.
Okay, so yes, the vampire, interestingly enough, it's the other way around. The vampire guardian, or warrior rather, or representative, councilman, is blue with a masked face and a fiery blade in his hand. The other is very Hilden looking in design with a kind of an angular head, which I'll edit into the video, you'll see it. Angular head and a physical version of the Soul Reaver. So naturally, this is like, oh, it's Raziel is the vampire champion, and Kane is the Hilden champion because Kane resembles the Hilden in some way physically. So it's like, oh, what? Mind blown. So they're learning this as the story goes on, and eventually they meet again. So this is, by the way, Raziel meets Tyrell, the final brother, and kills him. Just for that little bow tied on that little loose thread.
All the brothers are gone now at this stage, so you might as well just, Tyrell, look, I'm sorry, man. I haven't seen you in about, half a millennia, but yeah, I know I look a little bit different since the last time I saw you, but basically, Kane's gone nuts, and I think Kane has gone nuts, so no hard feelings.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing actually about Tyrell is that he is being worshipped as a god. He's essentially, there's this cult that's around. He's trapped in this pit, and nobody can see him. There's this heavy fog, and there are these worshippers throwing meat to him to feed him, and they chant Hashagik, which is a sort of a deity in this Nosgoth world, and they believe that Tyrell is Hashagik. And even like there's this the scene where Raziel meets him it's magnificent. Tyrell is blind, and he's this dog-like beast, and he kind of slinks along the ground, and he smells Raziel, and he's like, "Huh? I know the smell." But the way he speaks is very. I know that, like, it's almost like he's lost his mind. He can't verbalize properly. So he's like, yeah. So he's like, oh, what's that smell? Smells familiar. Not a lot of meat. Ooh. And then even the way he says Hashagik, and he tries to explain. Eventually, he tries to relay what happened to Raziel. He's like, hey, this is actually, they worship me as a god, and they give me meat, and I don't care anymore. And Raziel fights him and kills him. Yeah, it could be worse. He gets free meals. Eventually Raziel bests him in combat, and before he dies, the Hilden possess him and are like, "Yeah, Raziel, your time is up. We're coming for you. We're coming for Nosgoth. Game over, man." And eventually,
game over.
Exactly, Bill Paxton for the win. So eventually, Kane and Raziel meet. Kane is like, "Yo, I don't want to fight. I want us to put this behind us, and we can work together to stop Mobius and all that stuff." At this point as well, Kane is unaware of the Elder God and what it's been doing to Raziel and how it's been guiding him, or even how it brought him back.
Yeah.
So Kane doesn't want to fight. Raziel's like, you say that, but you're here with the blade that's supposed to suck me into it and kill me. Like, I am fated to die in that blade. And yet you bring it with you. And Kane's like, that's not what I want to do. And then Raziel is like, no, we're going to fight. We're having this out right fucking now. I'm done with questions. I'm done with answers. I want to kill you.
He's just at his breaking point now where he's fed up of being a puppet.
Yeah. It's a similar, like, it's arguably a similar plot point to, say, Solid Snake. Getting, everyone kind of misleads him, lies to him, tricks him. And throughout the entire franchise, he's always the last to know, and that's Raziel in this case. He's like, I'm fed up. I'm done. I'm taking you out, and this is it. It's over. So they fight. It's a really cool gameplay moment because you play as Raziel for the first half of the fight, I think, and then you play as Kane for the second half.
Oh, cool!
Because throughout the game, you are switching between the two, and it's a really cool gameplay. Like they're the most refined gameplay in the series. Yeah, so you're fighting back and forth. Eventually, they grasp each other, and Raziel starts to get sucked into the blade. And Kane is like, no, this isn't what I wanted. I'm your ally, Raziel. Why can't you see that? And Raziel's like, oh, well, fuck you. And like plunges his hand into Kane's chest and rips out his heart. Because earlier he was told he needed to revive Janos Audrin again, who's dead again, and put his heart into him.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? So remember when Raziel originally tore, the human Raziel tore Janos Audrin's heart
Yeah.
in Soul Reaver 2. It turns out that is what's known as the Black Heart, or Heart of Darkness, one of them.
Because
And
he's the vampire
yeah,
lord.
he's the OG vampire, and he creates other vampires.
I got you. Now, did he
Yeah.
create? Oh no, never mind.
No, Kane created Raziel, yeah. But as it turns out, the Heart of Darkness, because this is back in the Blood Omen timeline, the original Blood Omen, as it turns out, the Heart of Darkness is what Mortanius the Necromancer used to create Kane. So Kane didn't know this. He just had Janos Audrin's heart inside him all along. So, yeah.
What?
Yeah, it's fucking mental. So
it's mental in the sense that like there's so much going on, but like everything kind of comes full circle.
Yeah, oh, you gotta love it. So, and this is in like a sprawling cathedral with like gothic music playing, and it's beautiful.
Oh,
and yeah, so Raziel has Kane's / Janos's beating heart still in his hand, and he says Kane's signature phrase that he yelled a lot in Blood Omen 1, Ve Victis, woe to the conquered. So basically like, sucks to be you. And he does a telekinetic push, because they both have telekinesis in this game, and Kane's body disappears in a flash. It's like, gone. It's like, what? So Raziel travels to the body of Janos Audrin and revives him, while Kane awakens in the Hilden world. And it's like, what's going on? So Kane discovers the Hilden are trying to break loose, and he fights his way back into the real world somehow, or the Nosgoth world. I'm not entirely sure how that works. And
does he use Soul Reaver to break
something like, essentially something like that? Yeah, it's like, otherwise he wouldn't. I think having Soul Reaver is what kept him alive as well. I could be wrong. Raziel then, as I said, revives Janos, and Janos is like, right, shit, I'm alive again, and that's not great. It's like, why not? Because the Hilden, because I fell into the Hilden world, and now the Hilden are going to use me to set up the Sarafan that started everything, because this is back in
the Blood Omen timeline
before the Sarafan existed. And at this point, Raziel has to fight a possessed Janos, and the pillars literally explode.
What?
Yeah, it's like everything's happening now. So the pillars explode. At the moment, at some point in this game, you see the moment Kane refused to die in Blood Omen 1. It's a nice little tie back to the first game as well. You don't physically see Kane, you just see the pillars decay immediately, and then they explode, and the Hilden are able to pass through into Nosgoth or whatever. But Kane is back. But Raziel gets killed by Janos. So Kane is learning more and more. He's fighting his way back, and Raziel is finally like, you know what? I've had it with this stupid god. I'm so done. And Kane eventually finds Mobius praying to the Elder God, and like really stealthily like floats down behind him and is like, hey, impales him with the Soul Reaver.
Yeah.
And is like, oh yeah, go to your god. You know, like, piece of shit. So Mobius dies again. But at this point in time, Raziel is in the exact same room in the spectral realm.
Oh my god.
So Raziel is talking to the Elder God that Mobius was praying to in the real world. Obviously, Raziel's in the spirit world. And as Mobius dies, his spirit appears. And Raziel's like, oh shit. So he impales Mobius on the spirit version of the Soul Reaver, which had recently been purified by Ariel.
Yeah.
It was the purest version of the blade.
Yeah.
So he impales Mobius on that and is like, oh yeah, see your god now. And as a result of the purified blade, Mobius is able to see the tentacled monstrosity that is the Elder God and what it really looks like.
Oh my god.
And then Raziel eats his soul. And it's like, oh my god, what the fuck? So Elder God is like, oh cool. I mean, Mobius had done everything he needed to. I don't care. You still can't hurt me. You can't do anything to me.
Yeah.
So Raziel has an idea, and this broke me when I first played it. It was like, so you know how in the Soul Reaver games, Raziel can return to the physical world by inhabiting dead bodies. So
Yeah.
he inhabits Mobius's dead body in the same room,
Right.
and as the body gets up, the body gets up as Mobius, and Kane is like, "Man, you just won't stay dead," and impales him with the Soul Reaver. So he impales Mobius's body to the wall with the Soul Reaver, and the body changes into Raziel. And Kane is like, "No, I wasn't. No, what? No."
And the soul goes into the.
Yeah, so Raziel says, "I know this is what we're meant to do. I've purified the blade, and I am giving you the power to see the god for what it is." And so he puts his hand on Kane's chest and purifies Kane, as well as Kane is still a vampire, but his soul, I suppose, is purified.
Yeah.
So Kane goes into the blade. Sorry, Raziel goes into the blade. Kane is like, "Oh crap!" And then the Elder God shows up, and Kane fights it. It cuts off some of its tentacles and all that stuff. I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure it's a boss fight at the end of the game.
Yeah.
And then Kane's like, "Yeah, fuck this noise," and like jumps out of there. The whole place caves in, and is like, "Now I see you for what you are." And yeah. So he looks out over Nosgoth, Kane. He contemplates Raziel's sacrifice, and he says, I can't remember the exact words, but he basically says, "And Raziel gave me that one bitter taste of that thing, hope," or something to that effect.
Oh man!
And it's like, that's the end of the game.
It ends there.
It ends there with Kane surveying the land and feeling a hope.
Whoa, Christ, man, that's something else.
Yeah, the fact is, we've skimmed over a lot of stuff in this because the lore and the story are.
Oh, we could talk for hours about it.
Yeah, exactly, and other people have and done amazing jobs of like lore videos and all this stuff. There's so much to dig into in this franchise. And I think one thing, like even with the kind of the clashing ideals of Soul Reavers 2 and Blood Omen 2, I really feel they managed to tell a consistent, compelling story across 5 games.
Yeah.
And especially like I've never played a series like this where it essentially split into 2 different franchises temporarily, while still having an element of an overarching narrative. I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything done before or since that, at least not to that extent or even to that skill level. Like it's amazingly well told. The voice acting, Simon Templeman as Kane and Michael Bell as Raziel, Anna Gunn is Ariel from Breaking Bad. Like it's
alone,
yeah,
it's incredible. I mean,
yeah,
like you said, I mean it's one of those franchises where it's split down the middle and then divided itself into 2 sub franchises. But then Defiance kind of brought everything back full circle. There was fan service to the old games. It really linked everything together. But at the end of it, at the end of everything, Kane now is ruling over a broken, desolate land, but he's still the ruler.
Yeah, he's the ruler, and that's the thing. He's always ruled over a broken, desolate land. But now you have to wonder: is there that element of I owe this to Raziel to fix what I broke? Because Kane had a strange. I know, obviously, he crippled Raziel's wings, cast him into a fiery hell pit for 500 years. Bit of a dick move, but there was an element of respect or like camaraderie between them, even at their worst points. And Kane always respected at least from the point when Raziel returned. He always respected him to an extent. And that's why I think maybe it's left on a cliffhanger, but you can kind of interpret it as Kane may try and fix things. I don't think a game where he is fixing things would have been as interesting as what we got.
I don't even think that would be in Kane's nature.
Exactly.
I don't think it would be in his nature. He would probably. I think now it almost kind of reminds me of that last scene in Guns of the Patriots when Big Boss is sitting in front of the gravestone of the boss, and he's sitting with his son, and it's like throughout that game, Eva is the one who tells Solid Snake that your father never wanted you. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and he did it because he was cloned basically. But right at the end of Metal Gear Solid 4, he looks up at his son and says, "This is good, isn't it?"
Yeah.
And it's just that unnamed feeling, that mutual kind of respect that they had for each other. That this is how it went, and yeah, this is good.
Yeah. So I suppose to wrap up shortly, well, firstly, we'll touch on the game Nosgoth. It was an asymmetrical multiplayer game. It came out in June 2014, 2013, something like that, and nobody really played it, and the service shut down a couple of years later. Nobody particularly cared for it that I'm aware of. It was a spin-off.
Like that, was it?
No, it was basically just an attempt to. It was originally a single-player game, being developed as a single-player game, and then just turned into an asymmetrical multiplayer game that never really found a fan base. I think because the franchise is so well known for heavy storytelling in a single-player environment. So that existed and doesn't anymore. But as we discuss in all of our other videos, I suppose, what would you do if you were given the Legacy of Kain license, the IP, with an unlimited budget? What would you like to do with that franchise?
Well, having only played Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver for the PlayStation 1, all of what we've been kind of discussing today and me listening intently has kind of given me a few ideas about what way I'd like to do it. What I would like to see, and I know that there was rumors going around that the franchise was going to be either remade or rebooted or remastered for the PlayStation 5. I think isn't it the same group of people who are doing Demon Souls?
Allegedly, Blue Point Games.
Yeah.
That's the rumor anyway.
That
I'd be okay with.
Out a while. I mean, it hasn't been out for a while. Maybe they're too busy focusing on Demon Souls. But if a reboot was to happen and I was kind of spearheading it, what I would like to see would be Red Dead Redemption 2 really touch on this, is getting to know your brethren in that time of servitude to Kane would have been, you could flesh those characters out a little bit more. Although we're sub-boss battles in the games, I would have liked to see more of that camaraderie between Raziel and Malkaya, Duma, Zephyr, all of those guys. And then another thing that I was kind of contemplating would be, what if it was around that time of Blood Omen 1, when Kane is really coming to terms with his newfound skills. I'm sure that Blood Omen 1 probably touched upon it, but because it was that kind of asymmetrical Diablo kind of style, touch on that a lot. So maybe a more in-depth look as to Kane's transformation from stubborn noble to dangerous vampire would be where I would like to see the franchise maybe looking upon. As somebody who has played the games yourself and who's really into the lore and knows a lot about it, where would you go with the franchise? What would you do differently? Would you reboot or remake anything? What would you do?
I would, if I could, as it maybe kind of similar to you, I'd like to take maybe the earlier games in the franchise and give them a bit of a facelift, make them more mechanically appealing. I feel like you can't redo just one game in this franchise because they're all, so maybe excluding Blood Omen 2, they're all kind of key to the overarching plot of the Soul Reaver and Kane and Raziel. So if it would be possible, say, maybe a remastered collection of the franchise. I don't want a sequel. I don't think the story needs to be continued or explored any further. However, this idea of maybe, because the game takes place over such a wide berth of time, you could go into, say, maybe after Raziel's cast in the pit, look at, as you were saying, about learning more about the brothers,
yeah,
Kane's 500 years in rule and how that affected the why they mutated and changed the way they did, or even the years of Kane's rule up until the point of Blood Omen 2, or maybe Raziel's time as a vampire hunter in the Sarafan, or his time as a vampire before Kane betrayed him. So that kind of stuff.
There's a lot to kind of that could be
Yeah.
looked upon in those little moments in between each kind of entry of the Legacy franchise.
Yeah.
Because of the time span that jumps between each edition, there are little moments in those timelines that a lot could be expanded on about the lore of Nosgoth, the construction of the pillars, even the lands outside of Nosgoth you could have a look at as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, even like as you said about the construction of the pillars, what about the Hilden Vampire War that started about all this? Or maybe something set 1,000 years after the end of Defiance. There's, you could start a new story with new characters. The world is so vast, and obviously time travel is such a big thing. You wouldn't even have to have a canon storyline. You could explain it as an alternate timeline, or a timeline that almost happened, or there's a million ways they could get around these things.
It reminds me of that kind of Dark Souls kind of thing where time was so convoluted that your headcanon is probably, if you want to follow that headcanon of yours, who's to say it's wrong?
Yeah, you're not wrong. As a matter of fact, what I was saying before about some fans showing some disdain towards Blood Omen 2, a lot of them don't even consider it part of the main canon. And they're not wrong, because it is an event somewhat separate to everything else, but it does explain more about the Hilden and their relationships to the vampires. You can argue it's supplementary material that's not key to the overall narrative, but expands the world a bit more.
Yeah,
which is good. That's great. I enjoy the game for what it is, and if you don't want to play it, you're not missing much. If you say just did Blood Omen, Soul Reavers 1 and 2, and Defiance, so maybe a game that kind of is removed from that main continuity, not about Kane, not about Raziel, maybe about new characters, but it would have to have insanely good writing.
Oh yeah,
the best at voice acting in the business. Like, there's no denying it. And like I mean, not someone who can put on a cool voice. I mean people who have naturally amazing voices, like that kind of stuff. You need that. You
need characters in there, like voice actors who want to be part of it, who want
to
engage with the story, not just the person who, okay, I know they do a really good job of it, but like I need more. I need something more internal. I need them to want it. I think that's where the best performances come out of.
Yeah, absolutely.
They really want the project to happen. They really want it to work.
Yeah. Do you have any other points you'd like to make before we finish up?
I just love to see what happens with the franchise. If we ever are going to return to Nosgoth in some way, shape, or form, it'd be a shame to let this franchise go. I mean, I've learned an awful lot just by this retrospective of the Legacy of Kain and the Soul Reaver franchise. So thank you very, very much for your time and for sharing your knowledge. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I guess, guys, leave a comment down below. Let us know. Have you guys played any of the Legacy of Kain games? Have you enjoyed Soul Reaver? Maybe something you've probably learned during this call. So once again, I really, really want to thank you, Shepard, for spearheading this retrospective. Sincerely appreciate it.
Happy to
Until
help.
then, I've been Joker.
And I've been Shepard.
Take care, guys.
Thanks very much.